Hello friends, welcome to the Cold War Prepper. This is Lee, and this is part of the collaboration of producers of YouTube preparedness videos that we're putting out for September, National Preparedness Month. So I am doing days 4 and 14, and I know day 4 is coming out really late, and I apologize for that. We had a death in the family. Been going back and forth out of town to try to settle the estate and the funeral and everything else. But hopefully I'll have everything together for the 14th and have it on time. So today we're talking about cooking over an open flame. And then on the 14th, we'll be talking about cooking using your food that you have stashed away for the event of SHTF. Before we actually get into how we're going to do this, let's talk a little bit about when we're going to do this. When SHTF happens, all of a sudden things are going to be abnormal. People may be without their electric stoves or their gas stoves. We may be outside cooking on grills, etc., for the sole purpose of making sure that the foods we have in our refrigerators without electricity doesn't spoil. So you're going to see a large number of people outside cooking, probably for the first up to a week after SHTF. And that's where this is going to really be critical, is you're going to be using these techniques during that week. I would then say that once that week has passed, you're going to be one of those less than 5% who still have food while everybody else does not. So you don't want to give away the fact that you are eating while others are starving, unless you want them to know you're eating and that they're starving and you're willing to share with them. When you cook outdoors, there are several different things that are violations of operation security that you need to be really, really aware of. So, number one, if you do it at night, it's a light security issue, because flame, of course, and the embers will produce light and people will know that you're cooking. During the daytime, you have the problem of smoke. You also have the problem of convection currents, where they'll see those little kind of like ripples like you see in all the cowboy westerns, the heat coming off the desert floor. And then you're also going to have an odor issue, both with the burning of whatever fuel you're burning, as well as the odor of the food that you're cooking. So probably from the end of week 1 until, I'm going to say at least 6 to 8 weeks following SHTF, you don't want to use what I'll be teaching you right now. You're going to be wanting to cook things inside, but I'll teach you a couple ways to mitigate that a little bit. So let's talk about getting this ready out in your yard to cook over an open flame in your own home or in your yard. The first thing you want to do is you want to determine the site where you're going to do it. So you want to clear the ground. You want to ensure that there's nothing overhead that's going to be heated by the heat that's produced by your flames or your charcoal or your ashes, embers. You also want to clear an area around that area. And then you want to determine what you're going to use for a cooking container. I've got several. You can use a fire pit. I use a 14-inch grill, a kettle grill, portable kettle grill, and that works out really fantastic. You can also use rocks, bricks, or paving stones. Even those stones you use to line tree wells are fantastic to delineate an area where you're going to have your fire, so that fire doesn't get out and burn grass and etc. and start a grass fire. Which, by the way, the reason why we're doing this inside is because we are under a burn ban for that very reason. They don't want anything to get the grass or anything else caught. And we had a really bad wildfire here just 2 towns over, about 5 years ago, and burnt a lot of property and a lot of homes. And so when we're under drought conditions like we are here in Central Texas right now, they do put burn bans into effect, and it's difficult to go outside and cook. But once you've determined that area, then you're going to use your wood or your charcoal. And I would recommend that you store both. Now, the wood that you burn, there are a couple that you want to burn and some that you don't want to burn. So what you do want to burn, focus on trying to find hardwoods. These are going to be your oaks, maples, cherry, those types of pecan, mesquite. We're very lucky here in Central Texas. I have scrub oak and I have live oak. We also have mesquite. So all three of those are real good hard woods that burn really, really well in a cooking environment. Now, the ones you want to avoid are the soft woods like pine, fir, and cedar. Oh, you really want to avoid cedar. Cedar pops, spurts, and it'll hold embers for a long, long time. You think you put it out and it hasn't. We had a cedar area around our home about 25 years ago, and some kids on the 4th of July set off some firecrackers, bottle rockets or something, and they started a cedar fire. It took 20 companies to put out that 150-acre fire, and the embers were still hot from the cedars for 3 days afterwards. They had to have 3 crews stay there to put out spot fires that would pop up just because of the popping of the cedar. Kind of the same thing with pine cones. Pine cones have a habit of popping as well. Now you want to make sure that you're not too close to anything that's going to be flammable in your immediate vicinity around where you're cooking as well. So don't go in between 2 wood frame houses, for example. That would be a very poor place to put your cooking fire pit, or whatever. So you can also, with one of the things I really, really like about the fire pit, having a fire pit and edge stones and everything else, is it's so versatile because you can then use one of these grilled grates like this one here that all this is sitting on, and when you are cooking, you have 3 or 4 different options on how you can control or regulate the temperature of the coals that you're burning and how it's going to be affecting the cooking of your food. So the first one is, of course, the volume of what you're burning. So the more you burn, the hotter it is, and the less you burn, the cooler it'll be. With some exceptions. If you have a jet stove or you have a gasification stove, those are going to get hot, even with a very small amount of fuel. But with having something like this, you have a grill that's on legs, you can add more or take more coals or embers away from the bottom of where you're doing your cooking. So one of the ways that we can adjust the temperature of our cooking is to adjust the volume of burnable material, and that is going to be the amount of heat that's being produced. The second way, and this is most commonly going to be in one of those open pits or in a long grill, like a barrel grill, where you're going to have maybe your embers burning or your charcoal burning at one end of the grill and you're cooking at the other end. So this is, you're separating the distance, you're allowing for a little bit of a distance between the heat source and your cooking utensil. But just remember that only one side is getting the heat from that heat source. So you're going to have to rotate, turn your cooking instrument on a regular basis. Probably every 5 minutes, turn it 90 degrees. So that's moving it horizontally. Now the third way is to move it vertically. So we can raise the can or your cooking utensils above the fire, and that's what we accomplish with these grills, grill grates, and everything else. I have some grill grates here. These are camping grill grates, so this is out of my bug out bag, but just a grate that I have in my bug out bag, another one that we have that we can use in the backyard, and that was my original one in my bug out bag. So you can raise your utensils above the heat source. Dave Canterbury's Self-Reliant Outfitters used to have a contraption, and I have one. It's really a fantastic deal, but it's basically 3 pieces of rebar. So you drive the first one, which is a straight piece of rebar, into the ground. Then one had a, let's call it a plate on a long piece of rebar. Then it had an eye at the other end of the rebar. You put that over the rebar that's sticking in the ground, and then as the weight, so you've got this piece is sticking up, and this one's coming here. So as the weight got on the one out here, and this is where you had your cooking area, as the weight got on that, it basically caused friction, and so that would hold that piece of, in this case it would be a frying pan or something like that, where you set it. And then the third piece was another one that had that same eye on it, same principle, but it had a hook at the other end so you could hang something like a bush pot or something like that and adjust that temperature. You can also swing it away from the fire when necessary. So you can adjust the heat or the amount of exposure to heat from your cooking utensils by raising them or lowering them away from the fire. And then of course the second way was moving them distance horizontally away from the fire, and the first one was adding or subtracting burnable mass to the fire or from the fire. So some of the things that, some of the tools that you're going to have in order to get ready for this, of course, to process the wood, you're going to need, oh, I didn't tell you which woods to avoid. I was doing that. Avoid pine, fir, cedar. We got into the cedar, and then I kind of skipped subjects there on you. I'm very, very sorry. Do not, under any circumstances, burn anything for food that has been soaked in creosote. You aren't going to like the results of that. I would also say avoid, except under extreme circumstances, any pressurized wood that is used in home construction or commercial construction. Sometimes it does have some chemicals injected into it under pressure, and that can cause some problems. If you're going to live for a long time, it can cause problems later on in life. But, you know, all in all, you want to avoid any construction type material. You're going to primarily use raw wood. You also want to try to make sure that you are preparing your wood, that is aging it, letting it mature, letting it dry out for at least 6 months prior to trying to use it. So when you're picking up your wood out in the forest or along the side of the street, anything that's dead that you pick up is okay to use as a wood source for cooking. Anything you cut down or chop off that is green, cure that for 6 months before you use it. Let's get into tools that you're going to need. So I recommend you have a shovel so you can move your coals around. You can also use a hoe. You can also use a rake. But I like a shovel. I have a small shovel with a plexiglass handle that I use for moving my coals around in a large pit fire. Then you're also going to need to have stuff to process the wood. So an axe to cut down trees or to handle larger portions of wood, a hatchet for smaller ones, a knife so you can do your fine kindling and things like that. A saw proves very handy as well. So those might be some things you want to have available to you. As you're doing your cooking, some other things you might want to have. You can get these at any grill store. So if you go to your local discount store, wherever you buy garden supplies and things like that, or your grilling supplies, they're going to have the long-handled tongs, spatula, spoon, fork, all those kinds of things. You want to have those long-handled items so you aren't getting your hands too close to the fire on a regular basis. You also need some really good thick leather gloves, and because remember, as we cook with the equipment that kicked the tripod. As we're cooking with the materials we have here, of course, they're going to get hot, and so if you try to manhandle those without having gloves, that can be quite an experience. You make sure you have a first aid kit with burn ointment, sterile gauze, etc. Oh, here's a piece of trivia. Did you know that in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries in the U.S., the two leading causes of death for females were childbirth and burning? Now, what happened was when they built their homes and they would have a hearth that they would cook on, and they'd pull the coals out of their fireplace onto that hearth, and then they would do their cooking on the coals there. and they were wearing long flowing dresses, and quite often those dresses would come in contact with the ashes, not the ashes, the embers, and catch fire. And so that was a very, very large amount. Now, if you didn't die from the fire itself, you would die from the subsequent infection from the burns. But we don't want that to happen to you. So don't, make sure you're not wearing loose clothing and nothing that can get into the way of the fire. Make sure you have those good gloves that are going to help you handling the equipment. So some of the equipment I use, here's another tip that you might enjoy up until SHTF. If you want to keep your equipment looking neat and good and not getting totally charcoal burned or smoke burned or anything else, I learned this in Boy Scouts in the 60s. Take a little bit of liquid dish soap and rub it on the bottoms or the areas that are going to be exposed to heat and smoke on your cookware. And then you can use it, and when you get done with it, just wash off that soap, and you're going to pretty much have an almost brand new looking piece of equipment. So I probably won't go to that trouble in an SHTF environment, but before then it works well. So some of the things you might want to consider. This is I got this from REI. This is an REI titanium frying pan, 10-inch frying pan. It is coated so that, but you can also use it in open flame. Great for eggs. Back in the left corner, I have the Kettle, which is the best, fastest way to boil water that there is. I would get one of those. It also has its own little stove. I'm going to call it a stove, but it's actually a little stand where you can put twigs and stuff down in the bottom. This is one of those instances where you don't need a lot of fuel to do a lot of work. So you can use open flame down below it, and that's going to get your stuff boiling really quick. They come in 3 different sizes. This happens to be the smallest of the 3 that I'm showing you here. Another good piece of equipment to have is Seth McGinn's can cooker. This is the smallest of the 3 sizes they have here. This is another one of those outdoor pressure cooker type things, or slow cooker, whichever way you want to look at it. Back in the wagon train days, what they did was they took milk jugs. And so this is based off of a milk jug, except for the fact that it has a pressure valve release on the lid, and you can see the rubber gasket there, and that's going to maintain constant pressure without it exploding. But you can do all kinds of things. I've done a couple of videos and showed you some of the meals that we've cooked with our can cooker so far. Just a phenomenal piece of equipment. Another one over in the corner, and I checked on his website today, but this is no longer available either. So we have the rebar cooking system with the hook and the pot holder, and then we no longer have the bush pot cook set. But this is also another one of those things that you can get from that I got from David Canterbury's Self-Reliance Outfitters. You can still get the bush pot and other things like it, but it's got the bail handles. It's got the just several different ways you can use it. Great for stews, stoops, not casseroles, but chowders, which I believe are going to be the main things that we're going to be eating in a post-apocalyptic world. So that's kind of all the stuff you need to know about cooking with an open fire, with 1 or 2 small exceptions I want to make sure I don't forget to mention. Think safety. So even though you've arranged it so that your fire is far away from anything combustible, make sure you have a fire extinguisher and plenty of water, a bucket of water or something like that, so that if something does happen, you can quickly get that fire back under control and you're not going to let it grow out of control. That's also going to come in handy if you need to extinguish your fire. And I just can't tell you enough. One of the things when I talk about first aid in a post-apocalyptic world, I always use the statistics that are from camping and hiking and outdoors type stuff. And one of the number one things that happens that are seen in emergency rooms from campers and hikers are burns because of cooking. And so I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. Oh, and the other thing I forgot to mention is underneath the can cooker right here, I don't know if you can see it or not, but I have 2 different kinds of trivets. That's another way that we can elevate the pot from the fire. The last thing I want to include is, don't forget, and I didn't bring any out to put them out here for you, Don't forget your cast iron cookware. It is phenomenal for open fire cooking, especially a Dutch oven. And then remember, the rule here is you're going to use flames, and that's what you're going to primarily have cooking with the Kelly kettle. You're going to use flames to boil. You're going to use embers and charcoal to cook. So with that, flames to boil, charcoal or embers to cook. Remember that we're all in this together so we can get out the other side together. We've got 30 different days worth of subjects coming up. Look for this logo here on any of your thumbnails that you see, and we're using that as a thumbnail as the 30 people who are preparing videos for the 30 Days of Preparedness for National Preparedness Month, September. I am doing another one on the 14th, and I'm going to be cooking a meal using my prepper pantry. So I will see you then. Once again, I apologize for not having this out on the 4th. Unfortunately, that death in the family and funeral kind of took precedence. So remember, we're all in this together so we can come out the other side together. Please be kind, polite, and respectful to each other because togetherness is the key. Take care. Bye-bye.